December 21st, 1988, the night before my 21st birthday. And I, being a good Jewish boy, know that our people begin our celebrations the night before. So my friends were going to take me to a basketball game and then to the bars for my first legal drink. And as we were walking across the Syracuse University campus, we heard about a plane crash over in Europe. But hey, we were American college students. We weren't that concerned about Europe. At halftime of the game, we heard that the plane may have come down due to terrorist activity. And my junior year roommate, Nick, my freshman year girlfriend, Amy, my Grateful Dead touring friends, Tommy and Steven, they were studying abroad in Europe, and I knew that they were supposed to fly home any day now. So the story took on a personal resonance with me. And on the way to the bars that night, we stopped by my apartment to watch the 11 o'clock news. And that is where we heard about the tragic fate of Pan Am Flight 103. A Libyan terrorist had placed a bomb on board, killing everybody, including 36 of my fellow Syracuse University students. And yes, including Nick, Amy, Tommy, and Steven. And I learned a very valuable lesson that night, that my life is connected to people and events around the world that I don't even know about. Because Pan Am Flight 103 was the direct result of skirmishes and tensions between America and Libya that began back when I was 14 years old and definitely not understanding my connection to the world around me. And I began to think, what would happen if the people who acted out of fear, hatred, and ignorance, and causing harm to others, channeled that energy into getting to know other people? Could we avoid such tragic events? And this isn't anything new, people acting out of fear. In the Torah, we hear about the new Pharaoh who came upon the land of Egypt, who did not know from Joseph. And when he saw how numerous our people were becoming, the Hebrews, he did something very human. He acted out of fear. And instead of getting to know us, he enslaved us. And this begins our Passover story. But in 1988, when I was learning these lessons, I wanted to do something about this new knowledge, but I didn't know what I was going to do. I was graduating soon, and I knew I wasn't going to move to Libya. I wasn't going to go to a third world country. Hell, I wasn't even going to join the Peace Corps. I ended up moving to Washington, D.C. and becoming a synagogue youth director. And I got involved in the activities that one does, planning Purim carnivals, sporting events, overnights. But slowly, this desire and need to talk about and teach about connectedness started to well up in me. And I started to tweak our programming. And the teenagers in the youth group understood that if they wanted their free time on the overnight or their whitewater rafting on our camping trip, they had to give me what I wanted, which was 20 to 30 minutes to have a discussion about current events and about how we're all connected to this. And then I decided I would take it up a notch. And I began to take my youth group on an annual trip to a different city where we would engage with the people, the history, and the culture that made that city unique. One of our first visits was to Memphis, Tennessee, where we studied the history of rock and roll and the history of the civil rights movement and how they came together in that town and how Elvis helped break down the barriers between the races by just playing rock and roll. Because think about it. If I'm a 15-year-old teenager in Memphis, Tennessee, and I'm being taught that black people are the other, but I'm listening to Elvis, and I know Elvis is just really recording black musicians, and I want to hear that music, and I go to the record store, and I'm grooving to Little Richard, Chuck Berry, James Brown, and I look across, and there's a black guy also grooving to the same song. All of a sudden, we have a connecting point. We can relate to each other and talk about the fact that our parents hate this music, which makes us love it even more. Or how our brothers may have influenced us to listen to this music. And all of a sudden, he's not the other anymore. He's just another human being, another teenager, just trying to get by, listening to some good music. And I thought, if going to one city once a year was making this kind of impact, what if I took it to the next level? So I created a 5-week summer program where we take teenagers on a journey around America, where they engage with all sides of political issues, pro-life, pro-choice, pro-guns, pro-gun control, all to step out of their own echo chamber, to test drive their education and their opinions. And this idea of making sure that all voices are heard, it's a very Jewish idea, because one of our fundamental texts as a people, the Talmud, is really just a recording of all the arguments the rabbis were having, the winning arguments and the losing arguments, because the organizers of the Talmud understood an important fact. What was winning the debate back then may not be what we follow later, and what was considered the losing argument may be what we follow later. And we hear the story of two rabbis, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, and they were the Fox News and the MSNBC of the day. They would sit at the table and they would argue, yell, push, challenge each other. The story goes that one of these arguments got so intense that Reish Lakish dies, and Rabbi Yochanan is distraught. And the students of the yeshiva see how unhappy he is, so one of them steps up and takes Reish Lakish's place, except he chooses to just agree with Rabbi Yochanan. And this outrages Rabbi Yochanan. And he looks at the student and says, "How dare you think that you are replacing such a man as Reish Lakish by just agreeing with me? Don't you understand the value of challenging me, of making me prove myself?" And by the way, many Jewish laws that we follow today came out of that uncomfortable discussion. That's how powerful this can be. And I get that it can be uncomfortable. It cannot be something you might not want to do, to engage with somebody on the other side of the political argument than you. But it's so vital. And that's why we should probably begin just by creating connections. Start talking to somebody who disagrees with you about something y'all have in common. Maybe it's a movie you've seen, or a book you've read, or find somebody who's wearing a shirt of a sports team that you like, or a band that you follow. And start your connection there. Each summer in Colorado Springs, we meet with a conservative right activist. His name is Jim Pfaff. And he speaks to the teenagers about his opposition to marriage equality. And at the end of one of those talks, one of the teenagers raised her hand and said, "There is nothing I agree with you about. In fact, there is nothing about you I like." And Jim said, "Really? There's nothing about me you like?" And she looked him up and down. She said, "Well, I like your shoes." And Jim said, "Okay, let's start our connection there." That's how powerful connection can be. Because once you connect on something you have in common, for those of you who are willing to go down the path, you can elevate the discussion to the harder questions, the bigger topics, because that's where the work happens. That's where the understanding happens. That's where we start to break down the walls that separate us. And I get it. I know it can be scary. It may even seem dangerous to enter that territory. And once again, I would suggest we start small. Start talking to people online with the safety of the internet, or meet in a public space. You don't have to go to a Klan rally to do this, though I know somebody who did. His name is Daryl Davis, and he meets with my group in Washington, D.C. And Daryl is an African-American blues musician, and he accidentally befriended a Klansman. How you accidentally befriend a Klansman, I have no idea, but he did. And they started talking on a very surface level and making those connections. And once they had a friendship going, they were able to elevate it to the bigger questions, because Daryl had a burning desire to get an answer to the question, how can you hate me if you don't even know me? And as they were talking this through, the Klansman realized the baseless hatred that he had towards Daryl wasn't real. And all of a sudden, the ideology that he was taught by the Klan started to fall by the wayside. And he had nothing he could do except leave the Klan, because he had befriended Daryl, as did at least a dozen other Klansmen. And when they left, they gave Daryl their robes. And we're not talking about just basic members. We're talking about Grand Dragons and Imperial Wizards, the leadership of the Klan. This is the power when you sit and engage with people who don't think like you, who don't talk like you, who don't pray like you, who don't vote like you. You can start to bridge the gap. As a native Atlantan, I am so proud that my city is the birth home of one of the greatest Americans this country has produced, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And when he was speaking at Cornell University, he said, people hate each other because they fear each other. And they fear each other because they don't know each other. And they don't know each other because they can't communicate with each other. And they can't communicate with each other because they're separated from each other. May this be the time we start to realize we need to break down that what separates us. May this be the time that we humanize the saying that's above many arcs around the world, Da lifnei mi ata omed, know before whom you stand. Yes, we're talking about God, but maybe, just maybe, we can be talking about the God and the human being in front of us, and that we realize there is more that unites us than divides us.